Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the piano music. My name is Henry Timms. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of 92Y. It is a great pleasure to have you here for our session this afternoon with Stanford PAX, with the great Beth Kanter leading us this afternoon. For those of you who don't know the Y is a Jewish cultural and community center that reaches out all around the world. And one of the things we always think about is the communities of the future. One thing we're always trying to get ourselves to think about is how we are always a future tense organization. And with the idea of being a future tense organization is really the idea about this afternoon's session, which is we've been inspired for such a long time by the work done at Stanford by so many people in the fields of philanthropy. And of course, what's so exciting about the field of philanthropy is how much it's being disrupted, how many new opportunities there are to do new and exciting things. And we were really proud to be part of just one of those things last year when, with a lot of the people in the room today, we launched Giving Tuesday. For those of you who don't know, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Giving Tuesday. And what was so fascinating about that was within 70 days, driven by social media, a community of people in all 50 states, from a small family to a large multinational, all came together under one umbrella to do something new with giving. And really that's the theme of what we'll talk about this afternoon. We'll talk about that something new with giving. Because for those people living in the giving space, what's so exciting right now is the opportunities ahead and the opportunities which will be within your career lifespans are so excited to fundamentally transform the way we interact with the people we care about. That's something very different than giving. It's something about interacting with the people we care about. You know, one of the big shifts we've been observing is that the shift that social media brings to the philanthropy sector is from where we were as organizations. We were kind of content creators. We create our guidebook, we put our donor letter to go out each year, we create this content, and we'd hope people respond. But the shift we're seeing with social media is we're not just content creators, we are context creators. What's much more interesting with social giving is not what we give to people, but how we can encourage people to change their behaviors. And that encouraging people to change their behaviors will really be the theme of this afternoon. It's my great pleasure to introduce two people who know much, much, much more about all this than I do. Kim Meredith runs the Stanford Center at PAX, and they've been the greatest partners in bringing this event that they do every year in New York. They brought this to us. She'll talk a bit more about her organization, her role, and then she'll introduce the star attraction.
Hello. Oh, this is great. Now I can actually see you. The light's not there. Hello, I'm Kim Meredith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Stanford Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society. And we are a research center where scholars, practitioners, and leaders come together to explore these ideas for social change. We are also the publisher of the Stanford Social Innovation Review. So we like to say that we're actually in the business of knowledge creation, knowledge sharing, and community building through activities such as this. So special thanks to Henry for having us here at 92nd Y Tribeca, a very exciting location for us. And so we're really thrilled to actually be able to connect with a group of nonprofit leaders, leaders in philanthropy here in New York City. We do come here every year and have an alumni event, and so we will be doing that this evening, and we invite all of you to stay. Well, there'll be a reception after this discussion today that Beth will be leading, and then after the discussion from 5:30 to 6:30 will be the reception, and then from 6:30 to 8 we'll actually be featuring Rob Reich and Lucy Bernholtz discussing the new social economy or recoding good for the 21st century. So all of you are welcome to stay if you want to do that. Now, that said, back to this program, let me indicate that we on the West Coast have had the absolute delight to see Beth Kanter in action. She was a Packard Foundation Fellow for 3 years, and during her 3 years there, she actually engaged in deep research, learning about how people were thinking about social media, how they were using it, and what the implications of that are. She took her Beth's blog and, of course, has pushed way out beyond that and wrote The Networked Nonprofit. She then followed that book up with another book that came out last October, and we had the delight of hosting her during a book launch called The Networked Nonprofit. So we are very fortunate to have Beth here today. And for those of you, how many of you would self-identify as experts in social media? Any hands go up for that? I see just a couple. How many of you sort of put yourselves in that middle range, like I'm sort of comfortable with social media? Yeah, a few more hands. And how many consider themselves novice or just kind of in the process of learning? Some hands there. Yeah, okay, good. I like that honesty. That is really great because I have to say, for me coming into this role at the Stanford Center and then having the opportunity to acquire SSIR 3 years ago, we really need to just step back and say, how can we better connect with our readers at SSIR, push out our content, and really rethink how and what we do in our work. So as we acquired the Stanford Social Innovation Review in June of 2010, we were able to put together a financial package and bring it over from the business school, move it into our center, which is fully interdisciplinary and cross-sector, working with business, government, and the public, private, and philanthropic sector, in addition to working with 5 schools, 20 departments at the university, and then scholars around the country and practitioners around the country. And as a result of that, it became very clear that we had not moved out beyond. So we used some of those extra resources we raised, and about 8 months later, we hired a digital editor. And since we've hired that digital editor in February of 2011, we did a website redesign, and I'll have you click to the next slide. Thanks. Acknowledging Giving Tuesday and Henry and the 92nd Y. Yay, yoo-hoo. And the next slide. So after we took over and put resources into thinking about our online image, you can see that we have increased our web traffic rather dramatically. So that was step 1 for us, investment in an expert. That takes money, it takes a person, it took focus, it took strategy. And then the next step on the next slide, and I'm happy to say that last month we won the Webby Awards Best Website Redesign. So, yoo-hoo for us. One slide back to the social media slide. So, in addition, though, to having a website that represents our work and pushes out the content and rebuckets it so that you can find social entrepreneur information or corporate social responsibility or whatever it might be that you want, and having that aligned with journal articles, blogs, podcasts, webinars, we then integrated our social media strategy. And you can see, again, what that looks like over the most recent years in terms of our own growth. So I've been a very reluctant digital immigrant moving into a little bit of that space where there are all those digital natives. So for those of you who are in that space, let me reassure you, there is a path, and today you will find that path through Beth. Thank you, Beth, for being here. Beth, as I said, is an incredible writer, but she's also an inspiration in terms of her strategy and her tactics. So here we go.
Great. Well, thank you. Here we go. Thank you, Kim. And thank you, Henry. And I'm just delighted to be here because this could be a great opportunity to learn from each other and also from our distinguished guests who will be coming up here, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves as they come. But first, I want to get a sense of who's in the audience. And so this is, and since it started after 3 o'clock when the blood sugar starts to drop, it's going to be very interactive, and this is where we're going to get our exercise. Okay, so if you are an executive director of a nonprofit organization, stand up. Okay. All right, you can sit down. Any board members from nonprofit organizations, you can stand up. Okay. Wow, you can sit down. Social media managers or communications managers, stand up. Okay, but that's what the most of the room is. You can sit down. Anybody who works as a consultant, stand up. Okay, sit down. And I assume communications consultants, et cetera. Anyone a volunteer for a nonprofit? Any nonprofit volunteers? Yay for nonprofit volunteers. Okay, anyone who is here that doesn't work for a nonprofit but may work for maybe a corporation or CSR, corporate social responsibility, you can stand up. Okay, yes, right there. Great, okay, so how many of you are Stanford alumni? Stand up. Great, yay for Stanford. That's great. So we have a range of perspectives in the room, and most of the conversation is going to be geared towards leadership issues around the use of social media, both the tool set and the mindset. But the mindset has to come first. So what does it be to use social media for leadership and scale it within your organization? What does that change actually look like from the inside out? And then we're going to look at kind of, so that's like up on the balcony, if you will, the balcony issue. The other balcony issue we'll look at what can we learn from movements of people-powered campaigns, and what do nonprofit leaders need to know about those to leverage them, to enhance them, to reach social change outcomes. And so those are all the balcony issues. Then we're going to get on the dance floor. Literally, and we're going to talk about tools, and we're going to have Sharon from Mashable, because leaders, I think, not only do we have to see the big picture and the road ahead and the trends, but I think to really understand what this shift is in our culture and the way and what this disruptive technology is doing, we need to put our hands on it. And for those of you who mentioned that you're just beginning or not comfortable, I want to share something. I'm having a t-shirt made that says comfort zone equals dead zone. Okay, I spent a year writing a book about measurement, and I flunked math in 8th grade, okay? And I avoided it I knew that this book had to be written. I said, I'm not going to write a book about measurement because I can't do math. I can't do Excel. And then I said, no, I can learn this. And I published a book on measurement. Now I love it. So the idea is that we learn how to learn, okay? So being prepared to learn how to learn, we're going to be doing, it's going to be interactive as well as sharing content. So one of the first exercises that I want you all to do is something called a share pair. Anyone done a share pair? Okay, it's where you actually get up and you talk to someone that you don't know. Remember that? We used to talk to people instead of tweet at them. And I want you to introduce yourselves, and I want to talk about why did you come here? What was your burning question? And I want you to keep an eye on me, because when I raise my hand, I want you to raise your hand and stop talking. So it's share pair time. Get up, find somebody you don't know, and talk about why did you come? What's your burning question? Self-organizing without top-down control works great in 5th grade classrooms where I learned it observing my son's teacher. Great, so we have to do this other thing called popcorn, and so just brief, like a tweet. What were some of the themes that came up? And I'm just gonna pop at you and you can shout it out. Because I was told I can't run down off of the stage with the microphone or I will get the union will come running after me. What you said, anything. Themes that came up.
What I heard was his website sucks and he needs to work in his communication.
Okay. How many his website sucks and he needs to work on communication strategy, okay? And
our whole communication strategy is getting a complete top-down revamp.
Okay.
Including a new website. And we're trying to find a better way to communicate with you.
Well, it sounds like you could learn a lot from each other. Here, things that came up. I know this is awkward. I wish I had popcorn I'd throw. Okay, shout it out.
Better integrating web and social media content. So at times they're separate, and my shared partner wants to have it better.
Okay, so better an integrated content strategy and probably how to optimize your content for social channels and making sure that it is laddering up to reach your goals and that your audience just loves it. and that you have a way to measure whether or not your audience just loves it. I'm not sure we're going to go into that into depth, but I'm sure we'll talk about a couple of tools to help you facilitate that. Other things that came up.
Better understanding of the nuances of social media in a communication strategy.
Okay, what are the nuances of social media and a communication strategy? One thing we're going to talk about is what is the CEO's role or the executive director's role in social. What does it mean to be a social CEO? Other things that came up.
Starting up. Building a social media strategy from zero.
Okay, how to get started. I don't know if we have a whole lot of time to cover that, but we will actually be talking about it at the high level in terms of what leadership needs to do in terms to make that happen, because that's the first important step. And then there's also the tactical issues as well. Other things that came up. How do we know it works? Okay, you know, I just wrote a book about that. It's called Measuring the Network Nonprofit. You know it's working if you're measuring. And you know what? If it's not working, you know why it's not working, and you know how to fix it so it will work. Great. So we'll take one more, then move on.
Modernizing the message.
Modernizing the message. What does that mean?
They're up on channels, but they need to make sure that they're speaking current language.
Oh.
Support.
Okay, so I know another term for that is social media optimization. Is that what we're talking about? Like, how do you? I was just at a meeting with a lot of the foundations, and we were talking about how do you measure the outcomes of social media, and so we were talking about, so what is, that these 100-page PDFs that you're putting up on your website of policy papers, those are things that you probably wouldn't put on Twitter. You can't tweet a 100-page PDF. So how do you boil this down and optimize what you're doing for Twitter or other channel? Great, everyone can sit. And I am going to encourage you, there's a hashtag, PACSMYC. For those of you on Twitter, how many of you have one of these in your pocket? Okay, yes, you can use it. I'm going to, tweet your, some of the themes that came up from your conversations, and please feel free to tweet as we go along. So we're going to be talking about our next segment. My handle, hashtag is PAC. Oh, me? I'm at Kanter, Kanter. All right. So now we're going to be talking about, for the next few minutes, better leadership through social media with CEOs. And I happen to be very lucky to have a brave CEO, Ofer, who's going to join me on the stage. Would you like to sit or stand?
Whichever, but I'm going to tweet.
Oh, okay, so let's sit. Here, I'll give you this. Great. And keep my script. Great. I'm so glad. Is this working?
Can folks hear? Oh, I think this one works.
This one. Or maybe I should. Oh, there, it's working. Thank you. It's like, thank you, God. God is the AV person. They have a lot of power because they can make the mic work. So, Udi, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Udi Ofer, and I'm the executive director of the ACLU of New Jersey. For those of you who don't know, the ACLU obviously is one of the nation's largest human rights, civil rights organization, and the New Jersey affiliate has 15,000 members. It's all over the Garden State, and it's one of the largest ACLU affiliates in the country. Before I was there, I was actually the advocacy director at the ACLU of New York, where a lot of what I did was also, thinking beyond litigation as a tactic to pursue social justice. I'm a lawyer by training, so for me, going into the social media world is actually not a natural fit. It's one that I had to force a bit.
I thought lawyers don't tweet.
Right, exactly. I'm always worried about liability.
and privacy, right?
And well, yeah. I think this is where, obviously, being an ACLU attorney, privacy is obviously a very important component of our work. But at the same time, I think there's also, I've been on Facebook for a decade. I'm not as concerned about things that I proactively put out there.
So I actually met you because I was looking at Instagram. Everyone, we know what Instagram is? About photo sharing. And I happened to see a photo of you with the sign that said, "Ask me anything."
Right.
And we ended up doing an interview around, okay, so you're a CEO, you're the head of the ACLU, and you're on Twitter, and you're on YouTube, and you have the sign saying, "Ask me anything." So why are you doing that?
Right. Well, I got to say, that was actually the brainchild of our communications department, and Katie Wang is our communications director. The idea behind, so I started at the ACLU of New Jersey 2.5 months ago, and the idea was to introduce me to our community of members. And our communications department figured, well, how fun would it be to do a short 5-minute video where you can answer any questions that the ACLU community asks of you. So we put it out there on Facebook, on Twitter, and other
Weren't
social.
you afraid?
Well, I wasn't afraid because we handpicked which questions we were going to answer.
Oh, okay.
So it's not as if we didn't have control over it, and there were definitely some questions that we wanted to stay out of and not answer. But it was
What?
not. This is when the lawyer is going to come in.
Okay.
But it was actually, it was a bit weird, like being a second week on the job and sitting with one of my communication staff people, and we purposely wanted to give it kind of a grassroots feel, so we did the video over a laptop to make it feel a bit less professional, which was purposeful, which I think is really important for social media. And then it was a nice conversation. It ended up being a bit funny. Like, for example, one of the questions that was asked was, what's my favorite karaoke song? And that was actually one of the most fun ones.
Will you sing it for us?
After a few drinks. Well, I wanted to give a bit of a New Jersey, slant to it, so I definitely pulled some Bruce Springsteen.
So, were you an old hand on Twitter and,
Right.
are you a digital native?
Right. So I'm definitely not a Luddite, and I used, Facebook for many years, and I like technology. I have an iPhone, Apple, and so forth. But I actually never used Twitter before starting this job, and it was really my communications department, even before I started, asked me, what do you want your Twitter handle to be? And I was like, I have no idea. They suggested one for me, and within my first week on the job, I had a tweetorial, which was
What's a tweetorial?
Tweetorial is amazing.
I can't even say it. Tweetorial.
But it was literally a 2-page briefer that was prepared by my communications department. That was just the basics of tweeting. Everything, just the basic language and how to talk about it, which it could be awkward for new people, to the mechanics of it. And the whole tutorial lasted maybe 20 minutes. So the learning, while it may feel intimidating, actually the learning curve to learn the mechanics are actually quite simple. It's a very simple application.
But where'd you find the time?
Right.
Where'd
So,
you find, when I posted the story about you on my blog, there were comments, and somebody said, I'm a donor to the ACLU, and I really wonder why the executive director should be spending his time tweeting. I think he should be cultivating big donors. And what was your answer to that?
yeah, I read it, and my heart skipped a bit. Here's the deal. It is actually not that time-consuming, I believe. In response to that post, I said, I spend maybe a half an hour to 45 minutes on a busy day, a half an hour on a regular day on Twitter, but most of it is done through 3 to 4 minute segments. So literally, I tweet in between doing other stuff. And the term that I used, I think, on your post was, it's fill-in time. It's time that I think otherwise would not be used for any kind of purpose other than maybe reading something or catching up on reading emails. But I find that I use it when I just read a really interesting article on the train to work. My immediate reaction now is to post it on Twitter. I just had a conversation and I had a thought about it. So it's 3 to 4 minute gaps of time that I think otherwise would not be used as valuably. Having said that, there are times where you do put in more of an effort and you're kind of more proactive, and that at a certain period you want to send out a certain message or it's pre-planned. But I would say that's the minority of the time, and the majority of the time is actually in 3 to 4 minute segments.
So how is your presence on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, how is this in service of the ACLU's mission?
I gotta say, the part that's actually surprised me the most is how much I've learned. I think a lot of people think of social media as purely only in a way to put out your message, which is obviously a very important component, but I actually find that I am so much more informed on some of the most important policy issues that I've been working on for years, purely by subscribing to the right feeds and following the right people.
So it's like a form of professional development?
It's absolutely a form of professional development.
Is it networking, professional networking?
It's networking, and I said this, I think, in your post. I actually think it's a bit irresponsible for anyone who's in the policy arena not to track the conversations that are happening on Twitter and other social media sites by the policymakers. So I'm amazed by how much of a conversation was already engaged in some bills that I'm actually, shepherding through the legislative process, and there are people having that conversation about those bills that I actually wasn't aware of until I started subscribing, following their feeds. So it actually, I think it saves time in the sense of, I'm sure all of you have the blogs that you like to visit. So instead of visiting 20 different blogs, you can now get a briefing, through your feeds. And it's
But isn't it overwhelming?
Right. It's not. It's reading 2 sentences. It hasn't been overwhelming at all. It is a bit addictive, I will admit to that, and I'm actually trying to find the right balance because it's such instant gratification and it's such like instant information that then you find yourself as like, okay, I want more, and you're looking for more feeds on it. So it could be addictive, and I would say that's actually where you need to check yourself and not let it kind of take over your downtime.
So once you get over the fear, you enter addiction. And
I
then
know, I'm
after
trying to
you get
find-
beyond addiction, you get moderation.
Can I lie down? Because I feel like this is now moving to a therapy session, which I like.
Well, if you were talking to a group of executive directors from nonprofits
Yeah.
who were like at first maybe skeptical, and now they're kind of like, okay, I know this is important. I want to get started. What would be your, how to get started advice?
Yeah.
What should they do?
I would say the most important thing is obviously spend those 20 minutes to learn the mechanics, and don't be intimidated by it. It's actually pretty straightforward. Secondly, I think the best way to start off, look, you all read interesting reports, interesting newspaper articles. Just tweet about those articles. Like literally just say a sentence about an article that you just read and you want your community to know about. I would say that that's how I started. And originally my goal was maybe to tweet once a day, literally. And I was like, maybe we could do twice a day. But now I find myself tweeting like 5-6 times a day just because I want to. Like I want to share information that I've learned with my community of people.
So set a small goal, get comfortable with the mechanics, and let it grow from there. And I think I would also add, lean on your staff.
Well, and that's another thing. I mean, my communication staff is always available to help me with these things.
Do they ghost tweet for you?
So originally I thought that they would and they offered, but on a practical level, I think it's maybe happened once, maybe twice, but I do ask, and I do think this is important for executive directors, nothing should ever be posted without your approval. So someone can, draft a tweet for you, but it should not be posted without you okaying it.
Right, I remember the executive director of the Environmental Defense Fund was also on Twitter, and I asked their staff person, well, is he actually tweeting? And he said, well, he dictates the tweet to his assistant, but he
That's
pushes
terrible.
the post button.
That's terrible. But one thing that the other kind of really important thing, and I think this is really important for executive directors, is the relationships that I've actually built through my tweets, and particularly with staff for major policymakers and with journalists. So I've had exchanges with some of the Associated Press reporters in my region, kind of, making fun of one of them for being a Red Sox fan, for example. It's humanized it. I just had an exchange with the policy director for a mayor that I work really closely with. So it's broken down these walls that I think otherwise would exist.
That's great. So any questions of Udi? Anyone want to ask a question? Oh, okay. Shout it out.
So so this is the funny thing is, it's kind of amazed me that Beth has given me this recognition because I actually don't have a lot of followers. I've only been tweeting for 2 months. So I have like 250 followers, that is it.
So is that your metric for success, how many followers you have?
Well, that's the question. That's something I've been struggling with, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. Obviously, it's very tempting to track success in that matter. Like, for example, looking at your followers, comparing it to mine, I feel really small. And my staff has been really careful and kind of telling me that's not how you track it. So I got to say that is a learning curve. It's hard not to want to have more followers, but I have not let that dictate my decisions.
Well, I think measures of engagement are most important on Twitter. People retweeting, people engaging with you. And if your goal is, for professional development, networking, to use it as another channel to answer questions about the ACLU's issues, then you have to find measures of success that match those goals.
Yeah.
And it may not necessarily be the number of followers.
And that's been actually really rewarding. The retweets, the responses to my tweets. I mean, I've only had 200 tweets in my 2 months. And every time I tweet, there's some kind of response usually, either a retweet or a question. And that's actually been incredibly rewarding.
That's great. So what I'm going to have you do is another share pair exercise, all right? Unless we have any other questions. I didn't see any other. One more. Here.
What's a tweet that has gotten you into some sort of trouble?
So I kind of got into a little fight with a journalist where he had posted about a story regarding, I think, solitary confinement, and I felt like he missed an angle. So I wasn't looking to pick a fight, but I actually commented on it and tagged him on it, and he got really defensive. And he thought that I was actually attacking him. So then I kind of had to step it down a bit and said, look, actually, I wasn't. I think this is a complicated issue. So that was an experience where, in retrospect, I should not have tweeted it the way I tweeted it. I think tone is very hard on Twitter. And that's something that I'm still learning, where something may come out a bit more forceful or sarcastic or as a criticism, when in fact that's not how you meant it.
And I think many organizations are using their Twitter channels to cultivate journalists.
Yeah, no.
And placement and to debate with journalists.
Right. And this is where, again, it's quality, not quantity. I mean, the people that follow me on Twitter are actually, decision makers in my state. And I find that I know that they're reading my tweets, because then I run into them in different circles, and they mention things that
that's how you measure success.
Right, that the only way they knew about it is if they read my tweets. So it's incredibly rewarding. I've actually been really surprised. And again, the information, and also if you measure success by new information that you've obtained solely because of Twitter, then I think it's tremendous. I think that's something that's undervalued, is the amount of information that you obtain by following people on Twitter.
That's great. So we're going to do a little share pair now, because I felt the energy drop. It's time to get up. And I want you to find someone else that you haven't spoken with. And the question that I want you to discuss is, how can you make, how do you think your executive director, or if you are an executive director, how can you create time and space in what you're doing to make room for social media as part of your leadership toolkit? Or another question would be to think about what your executive director currently spends time doing, and how social can be a better channel for that, or enhance that. So take a few minutes to do a little share pair. I can always tell when it's harder to get people back that's an indicator usually that it was a thought-provoking conversation. Hopefully you were talking about ways that your organization can have its leadership use social to be a better leader. Anyone want to share something? Go ahead, shout it out.
We talked about that it's not just about how many people are following you, but also who you are following. And I know a lot of people who very carefully curate the people that they follow. So they have a really small number of people that they follow, but they're very particular and strategic.
Right. So it's follow the few to get to the many.
Yeah.
Finding the influencers.
I learned the definition of tweet.
Oh, that's great. Let's give them a hand.
The importance of reallocating time, so you're spending valuable time in an important way, which can be about tweeting, but also then making sure that the other important business is also getting done.
That's right. That's a great point. And that's a lot of ways that leaders get started with social, is thinking that this is just another channel to do something that's very important for the organization, and kind of integrating that into their workflow. And the hardest thing is getting started, like anything else, a new exercise program, a new diet. It's making that time to get it started. So everyone can sit. We're going to go to our next session. Right. So I'm going to ask my two guests to introduce themselves, and we're really going to be talking about the question of, what do nonprofit leaders need to know about movements? Why should they care? And how should they think differently about that? How they need to think about it in their mindset in terms of their social strategies, so they can leverage, they can enhance, sustain, or join movements, if that makes sense. So we are very lucky to have the CEO of Purpose. Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself and your work. Sure. If you want to do the.
Hello. I'm Jeremy Hymans. I'm the CEO of Purpose.com. We are this unusual outfit that's a home for movement building. So we kind of spend our time collecting amazing movement builders, people who are experts both as thinkers and also practitioners in movement building. They could be political organizers, they might be technologists who are focused on sort of technology for social change, designers, a whole bunch of other people. We put them together and we both incubate, we develop and launch new social movement organizations, and we work with existing organizations, big foundations like Gates and others, NGOs, and some companies around this kind of movement building work. So our focus is on how you do mass participation in the 21st century in ways that produce kind of lasting power and not just kind of thin internet memes.
Great. Matthew.
So I'm Matthew Bishop. Many of you may know me on Twitter as @MattBish, MattBish. And I am business editor in the US for The Economist magazine, and author of a book called Philanthrocapitalism, How Giving Can Save the World. And I suppose in my job as a journalist, I get to see inside some of the top-down, old power organizations like the World Economic Forum at Davos, a non-profit, at least technically, and also have been very involved in some bottom-up movements like Giving Tuesday, which I helped advise Henry in the launch of that and the team last year. Just been involved recently in the launch of the Social Progress Index, which is at SOC Progress, which is an attempt to kind of change how we measure the success and failure of countries according to whether they achieve social progress rather than economic movements. And I mean, that in itself, I think, is a part of a big change that's going on in the world to try and rethink how do we judge whether we're going in the right direction.
So when you're talking to traditional top-down leaders and you're talking about movements, how do you explain this phenomena to them and why it's important, why they should pay attention?
Well, I think everyone in positions of authority now feels very vulnerable in a way that I think is extremely healthy. When you see people being thrown out, when you see the Mubaraks or the Gaddafis brought down on the extreme form, but you see the potential for one slip, one mention of 47% in a campaign meeting turns into a video, turns into the end of your presidential hopes. People are very nervous. They understand that the world is changing, and they need to engage with that. And the fact that China reacts so heavy-handedly to the rise of social media and so forth tells you that they understand this is a very powerful force, and they don't know how to handle it, and they are very afraid.
So how do you make them less afraid?
Do you want to make them less afraid?
I don't know.
I think it's pretty healthy. I mean, hopefully the response that they will have, and it's interesting. Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum is extremely articulate and in favor of, at least in his talking about how this is going to empower ordinary people to play a much greater role in their deliberations and how they can be more transparent. And how they had quite early on a YouTube contest, and 10 people got to go to the World Economic Forum on the basis of their pitch that they made on YouTube. So they've been quite good in engaging with that. Right? But hopefully this will lead to them recognizing that a different style of leadership is needed, a different way of engaging with people.
So what is that style of leadership?
Well, I think it is. It's a style. I mean, the thing you learn very quickly, I think, as soon as you start tweeting or do any of this social media stuff, is that you are instantly visible in everything you do, and people are. If there's no integrity there, you get found out very quickly. If you say something stupid, you get found out very quickly. And that style of leadership has to be one that is really welcoming crowdsourcing of ideas, of
being
building,
more transparent,
building
and
consent,
building
broader organizations. So all the things that civil society has gone on about for so long actually is now really, I think, has to be part of any leader's daily routine. I think that was one of the things about Obama that puzzled me, is that he used it so well in getting elected, and then why wasn't there the daily kind of him live screening the cabinet meeting or something like that. I mean, why wasn't that happening? And so everyone suddenly felt, hang on, he's lost the plot. He's gone back to being old power when he was new power and getting elected.
So I call kind of the leadership style, in my first book I called it networked mindset. So being transparent, being to listen, engage, build relationships. Now, Jeremy, I read something interesting in your bio that you have been building movements since you were 8 years old. And it's something that you've continued to do in your adult years. And I'm wondering if you can articulate what you think some of the best practices or philosophies are about building movements.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm 9 now, so
in internet years?
Exactly. So, I mean, look, when I was a child activist, the internet wasn't really around, or certainly not like widely available, and so we used whatever technology we had at our disposal. So when I was, 13, and the Gulf War was about to happen, the first Gulf War in 1991, I organized a campaign to send faxes to James Baker and Tariq Aziz on the eve of their final negotiation before the war started. That was obviously not as effective as some of the work that we've done since then. But I think one of the things that I say to people is not to fixate on the technology. And sometimes you see people focus on, this is this cool new early adopter technology. Let's put 80% of our focus on our Pinterest strategy, rather than thinking, how do we meet people where they are? And so in our work at Purpose, we try to meet people where they are wherever possible. And so one of the first things I'd say is not to focus on the technology, but to actually focus on the organizational design that you bring to the table. That's actually much more important than what technology you're using, right? Which is that large, bureaucratic, risk-averse organizations typically don't do movement building well.
How many of you work for large, bureaucratic, risk-averse organizations? You don't have to raise your hand, but...
So if you're in one of those organizations, the question becomes not how do you give up, because there's actually plenty of opportunity, but how do you carve out a space for innovation where you can protect the people who need to do the kind of work that's about grassroots engagement from the pathologies of the organization itself? How do you create an innovation team that's protected, that can make a whole bunch of decisions that are only vetoed in exceptional circumstances, for example, that can do the kind of public engagement that you want? And I think often when we sort of work with NGOs, what we see is that there are certain structural factors that are impeding their ability to be this transparent, authentic personality of which you speak, and those need to be addressed first.
What are some of those structural factors?
Well, so for example, if you've got an organization that has inherent kind of turf conflicts between fundraising, policy, communications, et cetera, as many large NGOs have, then what you end up doing is all of those groups are kind of, there's a contestation around that voice, around the content, that results in a kind of diluted mishmash, right? So if you're going to make this stuff work, you have to carve out and protect the people who are doing that work and allow them to do it in a way that replicates the experiments in movement building that have been successful, that typically aren't large organizations initiating them. They're small groups of relatively free people applying entrepreneurial principles to their work. So there is a way to do that. I mean, we've developed this concept of an action factory as a way to work with big NGOs, but to take them out of some of those dynamics that we've described. But unless you do that very intentionally, you can have the best social media strategy in the world, but the organizational issues are ultimately going to be more important than the quality of your strategy. And I bet many of you are plugging away with brilliant strategies that are somewhat hampered in your capacity to implement them. So I think that there's an interesting dance there that people don't focus enough on those issues, and then they wonder why things aren't popping and succeeding the way more early stage, smaller groups are able to get things off the ground.
So I've heard 3 best practices. I've heard being transparent and and the second one of being authentic. If you make a mistake, own up to it. If you say something stupid, don't just delete your tweet or you'll get caught. And this whole other thing, which is more of an internal issue around how organizations are structured, particularly around their digital work. And so it's kind of like tear down the silos. Are there other things that nonprofit leaders need to know about movements? Best practices around movements.
I mean, I think one thing that we say to people is be careful before you think about coalition building as a means to movement building. Because the problem with coalitions of organizations is you get the same kind of dynamics, right? It's hard to agree on anything. You move much more slowly. And to find a really interesting voice is hard to do if 12 organizations need to agree. So I think if you're doing the movement building, do that in a way that's relatively unencumbered, and then partner with different organizations on different campaigns and initiatives that your movement runs. But people often tempted to start with the coalition, and they say, oh wow, if we got these 15 organizations to all do this together, wouldn't we have scale, and wouldn't that be amazing? But in reality, to actually mobilize and deploy that scale effectively, a coalition isn't a particularly effective way to do that. So often the apparent prize of that, it's better off doing the hard work of building a community in that more viral way than kind of clunking together a bunch of different organizations. So that's one best practice that I'd recommend when thinking about how to put initiatives together in this space.
Anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, the institutional form that I think is the best form for the 21st century is the posse. As in the Westerns, where basically a town is under attack or whatever, and the sheriff rounds up a group of people who have the right skills, and they ride out together, deal with the problem, and then go back to what they were doing normally. And so you could call it coalitions of the positive, which is another phrase I've heard used about it, or whatever. But I think basically it captures that sense of you're not trying to create a structural solution. You're trying to create a quick, versatile, flexible approach. You bring the right skills to the table, and you have a common purpose, and you ride out together, you deal with the problem and move on. And I think that's what we're seeing with the malaria campaign at the moment, I think, is achieving unprecedented reductions in malaria deaths precisely because it has that form of bringing together companies, the National Basketball Association, various health organizations, ExxonMobil, I mean, all sorts of unlikely groups, and yet it's got a very accomplished sheriff at the heart of it, a guy called Ray Chambers, who is just brilliant at getting the right people in the room, getting the right goals, and leading them. And then they'll all go their separate way. I mean, the groups would not normally come together around any issue, but suddenly they're working together on this one issue.
Because of being transparent and being connected.
I think the transparency, the connected, all those things are part of it, but it's about I think one of the things that the mistakes of the 20th century was the degree to which things became institutionalized and permanent structures. And then these structures stopped working, and then we didn't really know how to get rid of them. And so we still have a vast bureaucracy, the UN, for example, that doesn't seem to be in many ways fulfilling many of its purposes. And yet what do we do? And now we just get depressed about internationalism rather than saying, let's do it a different way.
So what do you think the balance is between the spontaneous and the strategic? Because I know the sort of classic ACLU campaign is a top-down campaign. Messaging discipline, and it's planned out for 6 months in advance. Everybody's on message, every channel, and you follow the rules. There's no improvisation. You do it. Where movements seem kind of messy and improvisation. We're making it up as we go along. What is that balance in an effective movement building?
Well, I mean, I think it's actually a little bit of a myth that movements are radically disorganized. Sometimes they are, but they're actually effective movements that are consolidated and enduring, actually have quite a lot of organization, and they combine the top down and the bottom up quite carefully. I think that the most important thing you can do these days is that the message discipline that worked well for you 20 years ago, pre-internet, is less important now. So in other words, you can have the perfect 30-second soundbite, but so what, right? The real test is, will your message be voluntarily transmitted by other people who will change it and adapt it and remix it in ways that ultimately will be to your benefit, right? So the best way to think about what you guys need to be doing now is kind of a meme drop. So you're dropping a set of language, a set of imagery, maybe some assets on people, but the real test of your effectiveness is not the discipline of your message, because the reality is that you can no longer just call your 4 journalists who you know and control the story. It's your ability to have the assets that you put out into the world be owned by others, understanding full well that they're going to be changed and manipulated by those people, and that net, that's a good thing.
Yeah, so you listen to people talk about brands in the commercial world today, and the whole idea of a brand is just so fundamentally different to what it was even 5 or 10 years ago, in that the best brands understand that they're not owned by the company, that they're owned by by the people, they're owned by the community that uses their products, and that their job as a company is to engage with that community as much as possible. And so, advertising increasingly is moving from being a big noisy thing at Super Bowl to being, how do we get people to talk about us in their conversations on Facebook? And then once you know who your most loyal people are, you make sure that whenever you have any opportunity to interact with them, you do so, and you make that experience as positive as possible. And that's just a world away from everything they used to, that vision of advertising in Mad Men, where you basically are manipulating a gullible public to buy all sorts of crap. That world is increasingly indefensible, and you have to give people a meaningful experience, even when you're selling a candy bar, let alone, I mean, causes, at least you have an underlying motivating factor there, but again, you need to make the experience of engaging with you a rewarding one that makes you feel more positive about the cause than you did before, rather than less positive and disillusioned, which I think a lot of past experiences with fundraising campaigns have often left people.
So, okay, so movements aren't as disorganized as one may think, as the outside casual observer may think, and that engagement and building relationships and getting people to love you and wanting to transfer your message is becoming more important. In the minute that we have left, if you could sum up maybe in 3 words, or in a tweet, a verbal tweet, what would be your advice to nonprofit leaders around movements? I'll give you a moment to think. Okay.
I don't know if I can pass the 140-word test, but I think it would be, liberate your your inner provocateur.
Okay.
So I mean, there was that phrase, act local, think global, and then that got turned around to sort of act global, think local, all these different versions. I think now it's multiple levels of that you've actually got to look at every range of thinking about every individual that you engage with. How do you make their engagement with you as rewarding and fulfilling and meaningful as possible, and how do you gain from that as well as them gaining for that to strengthen the relationship, but equally to understand that you're part of a global civil society that I think is on the threshold of exploding in a way that is going to be very dramatic for what it means for how the world organizes itself. And I'm just looking at something like the building collapse in Bangladesh, where all those Western retail brands have been caught up in that. I think the degree of scrutiny that companies are going to come under over the next few years compared to what they did in the past is going to force them to raise their game in ways that are really dramatic, and you want to be part of that global movement as well, even when you are here locally. So I think those jargon phrases are actually going to start to mean something now.
So think and act locally and globally, and liberate your inner provocateur. I like that. I think that could be a T-shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
So do we have any questions for our distinguished guests? Any questions about movements? Okay, shout it out from the back. You're going to have to come a little bit forward. And while she's moving, is there someone in the front who wants to shout out a question?
There's also mics. There's a mic there and a mic.
Okay, there's a mic right there.
I was wondering what advice you'd give to a nonprofit that has fewer resources. The consideration is, we have a small staff, small budget. What are the benefits of investing in a social media strategy that's larger than the standard at this point, and investing in building a movement around the nonprofit that's not necessarily seeking to raise funds for that nonprofit?
Okay, so why should smaller nonprofits with fewer resources invest in this approach?
Well, I was going to say, I think it really depends on the organization that you're running. So there would be some organizations that I would say, you know what, investing in social media isn't the most strategic thing you could do. You know, if you're serving an underprivileged community in a city, it might be that social media doesn't really advance your cause very much at all. So I think if you're doing work that involves changing behavior, that involves persuasion, that has policy goals, and frankly, that like your issue needs to have some populism. So I think one of the issues that that people run up against is they try to build a movement around something that isn't really going to be a movement. You know, that's more of a technocratic issue that might not be best addressed by public engagement. So having a nuanced sense of when to engage the public is probably the conversation that I'd want to have with you first. And then if the answer was we need the public right now, then we'd figure out how to go about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think partly, I think one of the things that's changed is that small organizations can be excellent organizations that others could learn a lot from, you also want to be excellent, so you want to learn from others. And social media, I think, allows both those things to happen at very low cost. I mean, if you do it well, it doesn't really cost you very much. And you might find that people discover you, and even though you thought you didn't have much more than to offer them where you might actually find you're the role model for millions of people around the world in a matter of weeks, and that would feel good. Besides anything else, it would be a chance for you to share your expertise, but equally you could learn a lot from just being part of your community of organizations that are doing interesting things. And Twitter and all these other sites, they make it so easy to stay on top of best practice and be part of the debate.
Like Udi, or start with something small, and don't feel that you have to have a huge, big project to get started with a small experiment, as you were saying, that can liberate your inner provocateur and see what happens. And I know someone's under a time crunch,
Me.
so I know yes. So let's give a hand to our distinguished guests and thank them. Great. And we're going to do another share pair, if you will. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So I want you to get up, and I want you to find somebody that you haven't talked to yet, and reflect a bit on what you've heard about movements, best practices for movements, and what's something that resonated or something that you can apply. So go at it. Ooh. That's great. Okay, so there are two mics on one on that side and one on that side. And I'd like to call a few volunteers. Actually, I would like to call three brave volunteers, 3 or 4 brave volunteers. Come on up. Come on up. And I'm going to interview about what you thought was interesting about this conversation so far. So we have one. Do I need to bribe people? Yes. I'm not above bribing. My son got all A's because I bribed him with a special bike. Okay. No, do I need to call out people? Everyone's looking away now. Okay, I see someone right there. Come on up. Come on up. Great. Oh, we had a volunteer? Come on up, too. Come on up, too. We'll have 4. Come on. Okay, come on up. No, I'm flexible. I'm making this whole thing up, so, it doesn't matter. Great. Why don't we, now you're going to hide from me, right? No. Okay, and you can put down the mic. I always hold the mic. Okay, so who do we have here?
My name is Alice.
Okay, from?
So I'm doing a fundraising for Mama Hope, which is a nonprofit out in San Francisco. We're basically trying to raise money for a school out in Tanzania. They need a nursery school, so I'm launching an event, and I'm a shameless marketer, so you might see me again.
So what were some of your takeaways from the discussion about movements or the earlier one about leadership?
I thought it was amazing because he really captured everything that I felt as well. Can I look at my notes?
So you took lots of notes. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Using my Note 2, which is an amazing product, I swiped my note to be transparent, which I actually never thought of that. I definitely thought it was so important to make sure that the content of whatever you're delivering the message is what the people want to hear. I always think context is more important than content, but sometimes you mess up, and then you think, maybe I can delete it and nobody will notice. And I do this, but no longer. I will not be deleting anymore. So that was a very, very powerful thought.
So that's something you can immediately put into practice. That's great. And who do we have here?
My name is Jonathan.
Okay, from?
I work, well, actually, I own my own company. I don't work for a nonprofit. I own White Studios, and I work with nonprofits and other socially minded companies to showcase the work they do and the communities and individuals they serve.
So what was your takeaway from the two discussions?
Well, really, I think, like what you said, context is very important. Actually, the discussion that we just had earlier was figuring out which sort of social media sites are important to use. I think a lot of people go into social media thinking, gosh, we need to tackle this and this entire social media entity right away. We need to sign up for Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and and I think it's really realizing what is useful, because there are certain social media outlets that may not be useful for your nonprofit.
That's right. And also an incremental approach, not having to be on every single platform known to mankind.
Right, exactly,
Then maybe it's appropriate for Mashable, of course, but maybe not for every single nonprofit. Maybe it's picking and choosing and building your movement to your capacity.
Right.
That's great. And lastly, we have,
Hello.
and I always hold the mic.
Okay, good, that's great. I don't want to hold it.
Okay.
In fact, I'll stand back. My name is Lynn Eckenberg. I'm actually, I've spent the last 20 years working directly in legal and social services in New York City. I'm here more in my capacity as a Stanford alum who's thinking about next steps and really intrigued by the world of philanthropy. But so I wanted to say a couple of things just to have you react to them, because my mind has been blown today. As someone who's sort of built and run programs for years, but never been at this place in an organization, and nobody ever asked me for content throughout my years at all these different social service organizations when I was actually doing the work. So I find this fascinating, like where's the content coming from? And is it development people doing this? Is it press and media folks? And it seems to me that we're like blurring the lines between traditional roles with development and press and media and public relations. And so I just thought I'd throw that out there for your reaction, because I think it's fascinating. And then, who are the people behind the content?
It's such an interesting question, because what you're getting at is the social organization. And I know when I used to say that when in my first book, network nonprofits will have everybody, have a social presence and working on behalf of the organization. There was a collective, so, effective social media isn't just siloed in the communications department. It is integrated into programs and fundraising and advocacy. And as Jeremy was talking about, having that structure inside your organization, so there's that, you're knocking down those silos.
So who is the person responsible for that within an organization? Because I'd love to be that person.
Well, you can make up your role. Well, it depends on the size of the organization and how large it is, how many different departments. But there was actually a fantastic article in 2011 on the Stanford SSIR Review blog, if I'm getting this, and it was about a study that some colleagues did of over 55 different advocacy organizations, and they looked at their internal departmental structures. Jason Mogus was one of the authors on the study, and they said that the most effective structure for larger ones is the hybrid structure, where you might have the fundraising department, the volunteer department, communications, and you have one person in each of those departments who's on the digital team, and they work together as a cross-departmental team. So you should go to the SSIR blog and Google hybrid or Jason Mogus, and you will come up with a 3-series blog post that will answer all those questions.
I just think one last thing, that this is fascinating, because the people on the front lines doing the work often feel like they're working in the shadows, that they're trying to save lives on the front line and nobody knows what they're doing. And to be able to break down walls in old, and I've worked for like the Children's Aid Society, the Legal Aid Society, Covenant House, like these are old institutional organizations where I think if there was a way to integrate where people doing the frontline work felt like they were part of the messaging,
You should
it
go,
would be revolutionary.
you should look up Hardly Normal on Twitter, and what he does, he is on the front line interviewing and talking to people who are homeless and raising awareness about people and working in partnership with different homeless agencies. So let's give them all a hand. can. Right. So this is a workshop where the audience is part of the content. So next on our agenda, now we get to the part where we get to get out of the balcony and onto the dance floor and start talking about tools. And I'm going to invite Sharon Fetter from Mashable up to the stage, who I think is one of the most knowledgeable people about this.
Thank you.
Thank you. So have a seat. Great. So Sharon, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Sharon Fetter. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Mashable.com, the top news site for the connected generation. If you're wondering what the connected generation is, it's people like me who are constantly on devices like this, sharing things on social media. One of the things I also do is I work very closely with the 92nd Street Y, the UN Foundation, on a number of social good initiatives with Mashable, including Giving Tuesday.
That's great. So we're going to talk about tools. You know,
Great.
I had this little joke going that when I look at my blog topics, I divide them into broccoli and cheese. And the broccoli is strategy, networks, organizational change, and the cheese is talking about the tools. So you need both, broccoli and cheese. So we're going to talk about tools first from the perspective of an individual, and maybe getting everyone on staff using these tools, or maybe the executive director. So what is your single most valuable social media tool, and why?
So I think mine is one that we've talked about a lot today. It's Twitter. For me, Twitter is really useful because it's both discovery. I discover great content there. It's thought leadership. I get to talk about what I care about. And also, it's a method of distribution, so that when Mashable or Giving Tuesday does something fantastic, I get to introduce it to the people who follow me.
So what is your Twitter routine?
So for me, it has to be sort of careful because, you know, as a couple of people mentioned already, Twitter can be a huge time suck. It can be incredibly overwhelming, just like any other social media tool or platform. So for me, it's really about finding the time during the day when I want to check it and I want to engage on it, so that I'm not constantly looking at it, which means in the morning, generally soon after waking up, I'm looking at some of the people that I follow that I've put on lists, and I could talk about that in a little bit, that I view as thought leaders that I want to provide my news in the morning, instead of looking at maybe a traditional news site. And then throughout the day, I'm checking in and looking to see what's happening in the world. For me, it is where I get a lot of my news. And then checking in with a lot of the people that I follow there to either retweet what they're talking about or to engage with them.
So is it really a matter of like figuring out who are the best people I should follow for the information that I want to get?
I think
there's
that's
something more to it.
I think that's a big part of it, right? It's sort of what world do you live in and what's important to you. Really then identifying who the people are that you then should be following and making that a part of your routine.
So how does, you know, let's say we have someone who's fairly new to Twitter and they're like, oh my God, how do I find legislators? How do I find, you know, I'm interested in, what am I interested in? I'm interested in iPhone 5 apps, you know, like how do I find the people that tweet about iPhone 5 apps? You know?
Well, I think there are a couple of ways. First off, there are directories where you can find this information. Something as simple as there were a couple of speakers here where I just entered in their first, last name, and then the word Twitter into Google, and easily found all of their information and their Twitter handle. But hashtags. Hashtags is another great tool that you mentioned earlier, which the hashtag here is PAX NYC. Often, if there's a topic that I'm really interested in, I'll use a hashtag to figure out who's talking about it and what they're saying. And that's clearly very relevant around major national days, holidays, and when there's a big news event, to figure out who are the top people who are tweeting about this topic.
So for example, with the Boston bombings, if you wanted to follow that, you quickly got to find out who were the credible sources.
Exactly.
So is your use of Twitter primarily as a research tool?
I think for me, it functions largely in that way. I know that, you know, so many people use Twitter differently. I'm very active in that I will tweet a lot, but I know other people who aren't as comfortable tweeting a lot, so they may use it to curate information or to research for, you know, if they're a journalist, if they're looking to write a story. You know, similarly, if they're a nonprofit trying to understand who are the people who are talking about the topic that matters to them.
So are there, you know, obviously you're using Twitter on your phone.
Yes.
And probably on a desktop now and then?
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. No, I don't feel so bad. So do you just go to the web or just go to the Twitter site, or are there other like helper applications that you
Yeah,
use?
so if you're looking for tools to use, I actually really do like Twitter's iPhone app. And they've done a great job with the web app, which is just if you go to twitter.com, it works very similarly. But there are other tools like, for example, TweetDeck, or Hootsuite rather, is a really good one that you can use. And Hootsuite has a professional or more enterprise tool as well that you can use throughout your organization.
So do you, you know, I hear from leaders a lot when I talk about different tools. I hear, where am I going to find the time? You know, I don't have the time to do that. Oh no, another tool. No, I just don't have the time. And I've come to the conclusion that you have to kind of make the time to learn, and you have to almost have like a learning strategy.
Yeah.
So do you, and obviously you probably have to learn a lot of new different tools. So what is your strategy for, you know, getting up to speed on a tool?
So I think if you approach it as this is something I have to do, it's never really going to be something that you're going to be invested in. You really have to invest the time to figure it out. Not just Twitter, but any tool. I constantly have to figure out, you know, between Google+, Pinterest, much smaller tools that we look at that are emerging. And you have to dig in and get to know it. And the way that I do that is by, one, researching, so reading around the web, how are people using this, finding the power users, and then looking at how the power users are using it. You know, who are they interacting with, how are they using it? And if I can find somebody that can show me, that can teach me one-on-one, it's incredibly valuable. And I think dedicating yourself to diving into that tool, taking the time, and then finding the time over the course of a week, a month, saying this is how often I'm going to use it until I'm familiar. And I think once you're familiar with a tool and you understand the value proposition, it feels much more natural. But for most people, I think it's really important to say, most people don't experience that from the start. It takes time.
That's great. So what are some other tools that you're using?
So Facebook, you know, it's funny to say Twitter when Facebook is such a huge part of where so many people spend time. Facebook's so important, I think, for nonprofits and nonprofit leaders, because nonprofit leaders can have their own Facebook pages which people follow, or Facebook profiles that are publicly followable. And it's such an amazing place to communicate what you as an individual are doing, what your organization is doing, and communicating it in a place where so many people are actively spending so much time there. And it becomes an opportunity for you to create content that's highly shareable, such that, you know, somebody can share it within their network and you're suddenly exposed to a much larger audience than you've started with.
So, I mean, on Facebook, one could have a brand page, so it's the logo talking,
Exactly.
if you will. And then I've also seen some nonprofit leaders use their personal profiles. Have any, you know, as you know, I assume that if they're sharing pictures of their kids or talking about golfing or whatever, that that they're doing something that's not going out to everybody. So, what are the options for an individual who wants to use their personal profile as a professional channel?
Yeah. So this comes down to privacy settings. So, for example, I have a public profile on Facebook, and you could follow me if you'd like without friending me, and I wouldn't have to friend you. And one thing that I can do is I can post updates, and I can do one in a little bit to show you how it works, where I will say this message is publicly facing. It's very easy for me to do. I could then choose, well, you know what, this message is only going to be exposed to my friends and my family. Or I could even choose to make a post only accessible to a specific group of people that I've already established. And those settings are really fantastic because if you, as a nonprofit leader, decide to utilize Facebook in this way, you can use your page for a number of different purposes. But I think it's fantastic to consider using Facebook in that way because it's so personal and humanizing. And I think having a human nonprofit or a human brand goes such a long way within the social space.
But it's important to understand the privacy.
Yes, absolutely.
So I know I had one executive director say to me, it was a woman saying, I don't want to use my personal profile on Facebook because everyone's going to see when I post pictures of taking my grandson to Chuck E. Cheese. And like, well, no, let's look at the privacy settings. You can actually navigate this pretty well. So is there a tutorial or something? Or is it best just to go to the Facebook help page? You know?
So I would assume there are a number of tutorials on this, a number of which are definitely on Facebook.
Or Mashable.
And I would be happy to figure out the link to the story on Mashable.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, mobile is becoming way more important. When I think even myself, I'm way more reliant on my mobile phone. I have a problem with my eyesight. So I resisted getting involved with my mobile phone, but then somebody said to me, you just need to do it and get better glasses. And I did that. And now it's like, not only am I using my social media, but I'm finding a lot more productivity tools, and it's like I can't go without my phone. So what are some useful tools for managing social or otherwise that one could do on their mobile?
Yeah, so one I want to emphasize here, mobile, I'm sure a lot of you have already heard it. People are spending more and more time on mobile. I know at Mashable, we've completely reimagined the look and feel of our website because so many people are going to the mobile web. In fact, I think about 30% of our traffic is consumed there. So it's really important when you think about where the people you're trying to target are, more than likely they're on mobile. So when it comes to tools, there are a number of apps that are incredibly useful. For me, I'm just going to open this. I could tell you right off the bat some of the things that
Is that an iPhone 5?
Yes, it is. So I am constantly on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. In addition, Vine, and I think Vine's an interesting one to mention.
Tell us about Vine.
Yeah. So one of the things we've talked about Facebook and Twitter that's so interesting is in the past year, people have started consuming a lot differently than just on mobile. So people are consuming via images and video. And that's really important because suddenly you have this huge opportunity to show people instead of just telling them. And so, on Facebook, visual imagery has become one of the most shared formats on the site. So when you see these massively shared images from brands or nonprofits, there's a huge opportunity there, but it also requires us to think about the kind of assets we're putting on Facebook and the kind of images we're posting.
So why don't you make a quick Vine video right up here and post it to Twitter with the hashtag?
Why don't we have why don't we do a quick thing after and I could do it and we'll post it and show?
Okay.
Yeah, you guys are not going to want to see my shaky hands. I can't create a video at the same quality that I know Jonathan over there can. Maybe we should make you create the Vine.
Yes, you maybe should come up and create a Vine.
I love it. Okay, we're going to outsource this.
Come on.
So in talking about these for a little bit, I think it's really important to talk about what we're seeing. So Facebook, for example, great opportunity to create really strong imagery that's shared across Facebook. But similarly, if you look at other social networks, like Pinterest, like Instagram, these are areas where photos are the things that are being shared, images. And there's a huge opportunity there, and those things too are very heavily mobile. People are using these social networks and they're taking photos from their phones more and more. If I were to talk about my most used apps on my phone, it would probably be my camera, Instagram, in addition to the ones I mentioned earlier, and there's a huge opportunity there.
That's great.
Yeah.
So what are some of the photo editing apps that you're using?
Photo editing. So I have to admit, there was a long time where I was using photo editing apps, and I actually stopped. And because a lot of my phone's tools have become a lot better, which is to say that the iPhone 5, it's replaced my camera because the camera itself here has gotten much better. Same thing for a lot of Android devices. The cameras on the Android devices have gotten better too, which again provide you with an opportunity to take more pictures when you're out and about. Because more than likely, you have access to things that people in your community want to see. So for example, a little while earlier, we were talking about the African parks. Now, if I was abroad and I wanted to take a picture of something related to my nonprofit, this would be a great tool because I can then show my community who can't travel to Africa with me what I'm experiencing, and then share that to social and have it exposed to so many more people than I could have otherwise.
That's great, because I know a lot of nonprofit CEOs, once, the first step is getting on Twitter for many, and once they've gotten on Twitter, their communications teams are urging them, take your iPhone out when you're out and about at public events and take photos. So
Yeah.
any like quick tips on taking photos with your phone?
Taking photos. Okay, so one, and this is something I always see, I see a lot of people post really blurry photos, and I think it's important to remember that you can have a second shot, which is like the simplest advice ever, but take your time to get a good photo. There's no rush. Also, think about what in the photo is going to be interesting to the people who are looking. So it may not be that a picture of a wide room is going to be really interesting, but there may be 2 or 3 people in the room that you could take a photo with that would make it really compelling. And sometimes that requires you to take a step back and think visually, which we're not all trained in. I know that for me, sometimes I'll crop images to focus on one specific thing. And I think I think it's in taking that extra step and thinking about the filters, the cropping tools on these apps, that you can provide a better image to people who are going to be sharing.
That's great. So I'm looking down my list.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And what about, another thing I hear from nonprofit leaders that have moved from paper and taking notes on their paper, is there a digital tool that you can use to take notes when you're, you're looking at things online, you're getting a lot of different information, and instead of having millions of pieces of paper, is there a great app for note taking?
So there are so many apps for note taking. I would say one example is Evernote. Is a great way of capturing moments and notes and things you want to return to. I would say, in addition, there are so many different devices that allow for these apps. I know you had mentioned the Note earlier. I'm almost wondering if you've discovered one on another device that you like. Are you really? Oh, she's using Evernote. I love that. Yeah.
So why don't we open it up now for questions? Again, I want to remind you that we have 2 mics in the back of the room. So if you could go to the mic so everyone can hear your question.
Yeah, and by the way, I should say I'm probably least qualified in the world to tell you guys how to take better pictures on your phones. Don't judge my pictures on Twitter.
No, I think one of my best tips was from a photographer, and they said, keep the horizon straight.
Yeah.
That, and also the rule of thirds, to compose your shots. Take that extra moment, and to turn on the grid in your camera.
Oh, that's
question?
Great.
Yep. First, I'm on an Android phone, so I'm using G Notes, and it connects to my Gmail so that I have it in 2 different places. I like that. Linking. I do a lot of linking because I am the official Twitter and Facebook for my nonprofit, but I'm also trying to also do that for myself. So I use TweetDeck, of course, to manage all of my 3 Twitter accounts and 2 Facebook accounts. But what do you think about linking? Because I have my Facebook funneling into Twitter for my nonprofit.
I thought you were saying LinkedIn before. I was
that's what I thought too.
But I want to say I miss LinkedIn. LinkedIn is huge, so we should maybe talk about that later.
Okay.
So linking. So you mean linking your Twitter account into Facebook so that your tweets are showing on Facebook?
Yep, or vice versa.
Got it. Yep. I'm a little mixed on that. It depends on what your goal is here and whether it matters that you're messaging the same message across 2 communities. But I think it's really important to assume that you're talking to 2 different communities, because the expectations on Twitter versus Facebook are very different. So I know personally, in both my own social media and my team's social media and Mashable, we try to create different messaging. And a lot of the times we're messaging different things entirely, not just in the way we're communicating, but what we're choosing to share with those social networks. Because really on Twitter, what we find is, a lot of the time we're sharing very specific stories to Twitter. For Facebook, we have a number of different Facebook pages focused on various topical areas. And some kinds of stories or some topics will play very well there that wouldn't play well, for example, on a Google+. So I think this really comes down to who you're talking to, what you're trying to tell them, and knowing which audiences are following you and what they prefer. And sometimes it's really helpful to interact with your communities and just ask them.
I think it's also important to have a editorial calendar where you've mapped some of that out, so you know the frequency that you're posting to the different sites and how you're slightly tweaking content. I have a strong opinion against automating. I tell them not to do it because people know it, and so even if it's like you're posting a photo onto Facebook that links back to a story that that's on your blog, you might be then doing, you'll have the photo on Facebook, and then on Twitter, it just might be a summary or a slightly different title than the blog post. And it doesn't necessarily have to take a lot of time, but if you've sort of mapped that out, then you can sort of check it off the list.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, usually you can be much more effective by taking that extra time and tailoring to those audiences.
And I know there's also a big debate about scheduling apps, especially on Twitter. I know with the Boston Marathon, some people got into trouble because they were scheduling tweets and they weren't being sensitive to unfolding events.
Well, I think this is an area that's somewhat controversial in the space because you have a lot of brands that, they'll automate tweets, and that's okay if that's what they decide to do, but I think it does in situations where there's a disaster take a level of awareness to stop the tweet. But you do have a lot of brands and nonprofits that try to take the extra step and be human and tailor their tweets or their updates in real time. I would say some of that's changing now. So, for example, we use a tool called Social Flow, which is incredibly useful to us in that when we are scheduling our tweets to go out that promote stories or initiatives we're working on, we'll put it in a queue, and this tool called Social Flow will essentially look at our social networks and decide when the best time to publish is for the best reach. And it's been incredibly useful for us, and despite that automation, it's really helped better fulfill our goals.
And is Social Flow a free tool or is it a paid tool?
It's not a free tool, but it's also not an absurdly expensive tool. So I would say it's worth looking into if that's one of your goals.
And of course, there are a couple of others like Spreadfast, and there are a number of free apps for different social platforms, like Buffer app can help you cross-post scheduled posts, Buffer app, Post Planner, and a few others. That have been popular. So we started to move into some enterprise level tools. So should we go there? Or?
Sure.
Okay, well, here's, one thing I hear a lot about nonprofits love free tools. Because, right? How many of you love free tools? Yeah, because we don't always have the money. And sometimes we get into trouble because they disappear. And most recently, one of them that was Google News Reader, and there was a collective scream that happened in the nonprofit sector when that newsreader went belly up.
Sector.
So is there a replacement for that?
There are definitely replacements popping up. I know that there are a number of companies that are trying to grab that space. But I would say Google Reader, it's a great way of consuming news. What I see is opportunities like, I think it's like Feedly. And Dig is coming out with a number of new consumption options. But I feel like Google Reader is almost in its own category, right? When it comes to social, I know I haven't consumed as much social there. I know some people follow their social feeds there.
Yeah. I know, as a trainer, I've had to learn different platforms, and I had already learned Feedly, so I was kind of felt glad that I wasn't comfortable in any one platform. And I liked Feedly because there's a great app for the phone, and it could import my Google Reader feeds right away. Automatically. And I was up and running, and I've talked to a few other colleagues in the nonprofit sector who said they don't even miss their Google Reader anymore.
Well, I think one of the things that really happened, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Google Reader or use it. How many people use it?
How many use an RSS reader?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that has essentially happened is that social, with people consuming so much news on Facebook and Twitter, it's created less of a need for tools like this. And so there are a lot of people who still rely on it who are incredibly frustrated by Google's decision.
Yeah, I do a lot of content curation, so I also go more deeply into the content curation tools. So that's like looking, scanning across different topics and picking out the best sources and then sort of curating them for the community. And so one tool I really like is Scoop It, Storify, which allows you to curate tweets, and Pinterest actually for curation. So are there, there's a category of tools called social media productivity tools, which I think Social Flow would be an example of that. Are there any others?
There definitely are many others. I'm not as familiar with the others. We use this, so I'm very excited by what it's allowed us to do.
Does it also help you measure?
Yes, so measurement is really important here. We gain a better understanding through Social Flow. on other networks, we're using other tools. We've been really excited to see sort of the huge movement in the space because so many of these tools exist. And that's everything from Omniture to Salesforce Marketing Cloud. And a lot of these are incredibly big, expensive tools, but there are so many less expensive tools that are really accessible or free tools. And one of the free tools that I definitely recommend people explore is Bitly. If you're familiar with Bitly, Bitly allows you to shorten links, but it also allows you to review analytics, and it's incredibly useful. I think sometimes we get trapped in sort of this conversation around data and being able to access data and analytics. And heavy analytics and data isn't always the answer for every organization. I think, especially for organizations that are starting out on social, it's important to sort of take a step back and think about the kind of data that is useful to you and helps you understand where you're going, and to think then about the kind of tools you need. And I'm fairly sure that a number of you maybe don't need that heavy, huge, expensive tool. Maybe starting out, you need a smaller tool that is
I always
free.
say that they start out with a
Yeah,
spreadsheet.
yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
I decided to start a Tumblr blog called, well, the nice title for it is That's a Spreadsheet, but if you know the Tumblr community, it's FYes Spreadsheets. So, monitoring and listening is really important, especially for building movements. Who's talking about our issue out there? So what are some brand monitoring tools that you like?
Yeah. So, I mean, starting out simple with Twitter, right? If I'm on Twitter and I want to get a sense of who's talking about my brand, all I have to do is run a search, and that'll really help me. Same thing using some of these tools like Hootsuite. Hootsuite's incredible. We talked about how they have an enterprise tool that's an upgrade from the personal tool. I think that's really useful. And then you get into some of these maybe heavier tools, the Radian 6s, Salesforce Marketing
I just
Cloud.
found out about
Yeah.
one on Mashable, as a matter of fact, and I absolutely love it.
Teach me.
Okay. Well, there was a rumor going on that Google Alerts might walk the plank, and so I was noticing over the last few months that Google Alerts hasn't really been working very well. And so I found this other tool. Mashable posted this great article about that, and it was called Mention.
Oh, so Mention and Newsel. I would say Newsel is incredibly useful as well, and I hope I'm pronouncing it the right way. I think it's Newsle. These are becoming really, really interesting, especially in filtering out a lot of the noise, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I liked about Mention is that it's like a dashboard, like Hootsuite. But it's scraping or gathering keywords from other sources. So I can see blogs, I can look at the websites, I can look at Facebook, Pinterest, anybody who's mentioned, a certain keyword, and I can see it, and I can link my accounts to it, and I can respond to it. And it's free.
That's incredible.
Up to a point.
Oh.
There's a free version. You can only click 3 different keywords,
Yeah.
and then you have to start to pay.
Oh, wow.
So, let's open it up for some more questions. We have more questions about tools.
I have a question. Actually, it's a two-part
And if you could go to the mic too, that'd be great.
So I just want to point out, Jonathan actually shooted some of our Giving Tuesday videos and was super helpful, and I'm so appreciative of that.
Thank you, Sharon. So this is something that you could probably answer really well, and I think it's an important question, and it's a two-part question. So first, what would you say that using tools like Hootsuite may not be so effective in that organizations should sort of curtail tweets to specific platforms? Because let's say if they tag people like lawmakers, for example, that Facebook and Twitter handles might differ. And then the second question is it important for a nonprofit organization to have the same handle for each platform?
So the first one sort of goes back to the automation conversation, right? And I think that's sort of taking that extra step. If I were to automate and tweet or update to Facebook and Twitter at the same time and tag people, the same people, it might not necessarily work the same way on both platforms, and then it might not achieve the goal. So I'm a big believer in taking that extra step and making sure that I'm appropriately tagging those people, because the end benefit is worth it if I've then gone to both platforms and I've taken that extra step of getting all of those people's awareness on that platform or those platforms. The second question was...
Is it important, do you think, for nonprofits to have the same handle, like facebook.com/ and twitter.com/?
I think it's helpful. I think anything that is helpful and makes the end user's work a little easier is worthwhile. Because ultimately, that end user is only going to search so many times. You want to make it really effortless for them.
So what's the best way to keep on top of new social media tools?
Clearly to read Mashable. Yeah, reading Mashable.
And you can subscribe to a specific feed on
Yes,
Mashable, so
you
I
can.
could, if I was just interested in tools, I could just pick up that strand.
Absolutely, yeah. But I also would say, I think there's a real opportunity for people in this room to go out and get involved in social media communities, and specifically in the tech community. I think there's something really inspiring about a lot of the meetups that happen, at least the ones that I go to around New York and in other areas. So many cities have become tech hubs, New York especially, and there's a real opportunity to go out, maybe despite not being a part of that community if you're not, and take part and learn from those people, because a lot of it is very contagious and it's very inspiring. And as a result, you're really exposed to the people who are living and breathing it.
So how do I find out about these tech meetups? I mean, or you want to name some of the ones that you go to that you find exciting?
Sure. So I could start out with New York Tech Meetup is fantastic. There's also a fantastic organization, and I know one of the co-organizers is in this room, called Community Managers Meetup. And then, even going to something as simple as meetup.org and searching for the meetups that are happening in your area could be incredibly useful because, even if you're from another city, it's very likely that there are a number of events that happen there regularly.
That's great. Any other questions for Sharon while we have her? Okay.
Sure. So I love LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn for a number of years was viewed as the place people go to find jobs. And I think that view of LinkedIn has dramatically changed. LinkedIn has really invested in, one, mobile. They have a great mobile interface now. But
Card Munch.
Sorry?
Card
Munch, yeah. And their apps. But also, they're investing in content. And it's become a place for thought leadership. So you have a number of very established business leaders, nonprofit leaders from around the world writing on LinkedIn. And it's become a great place to learn and consume and discover. In addition to that, it of course is a fantastic place for groups, finding people who care about specific topics. And I'm really impressed personally as somebody who handles recruitment and HR within my organization with their investment in recruitment tools, so that if you are looking for digitally savvy staff, if you're looking for administrative staff, really across the board, it's become a great place to find people to work within your organization.
And LinkedIn has also repackaged their professional tool, and they're giving it away as a board recruitment tool. It's called Board Connect. You have to sign up for the webinar, but what it allows you to do is to search not only for board members that have particular skills, but also that have really good networks. Yeah. That's a great tip.
One of the things I do love about LinkedIn is, on Facebook, I can find anybody and I can follow them. Or I can try to friend them. Maybe not everybody would friend me back. It is a personal space for a lot of people still. And similarly on Twitter, you can find somebody, you can follow them. But I feel on LinkedIn you could truly connect and ask to engage. And I think it's a great opportunity if you're looking to connect with somebody, maybe from another organization or somebody who you think would be great to speak at one of your events. It's really easy to reach out to somebody and make that request or start that conversation.
Well, that's great, Sharon. You just have given us a huge amount of wealthy information about tools. Tools that nonprofit leaders can use from Twitter. You've shared some insights about how you're using these tools, and you've talked a lot about different categories of tools that organizations themselves can use it. So let's give Sharon a hand. Thank you. And so for our final segment, this is the networking portion. And everybody got a name tag. when they came in, right? More or less. But there are sticky notes on the table, right? Okay, so we're going to have a speed networking session, okay? And it's going to be it's going to be deceptively disorganized like a movement, okay? But there is organization to it. So I want you to, on your name tag, and if you don't have a name tag, get a sticky note and a magic marker, and I want you to write the names of 2 tools or 2 topics that we've discussed today. So you could be, Twitter movements. If you were interested in learning more about Twitter or networking around getting Twitter tips from someone else, finding out how they use it, asking questions. So I want you to write, she's doing a Vine of me. So I want you to write 2 keywords on your name tag that relate to some of the topics that we've discussed. Okay, that's the first step. I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, so put it on your name tag or on a sticky note right here. Okay, and then your goal in the next 20 minutes is going to be get up and introduce yourself to 10 other people in the room and have a quick conversation about the keywords that are on your name tags. Okay, got that? Everyone with me? When I was doing a training in Tunisia, and I was translated into Arabic and French, and after a while I was saying, has everyone seen Mission Impossible? They said yes. And I said, when he said, are you with me? And I kept on saying, are you with me? So are you with me? Are you with me? Okay, all right. So everyone have their name tags and their keywords on their name tags? Okay, so you have 20 minutes now to network and work the room and to meet another person in the room and have a conversation about what's on your name tag. Okay, get up, go. Okay, great. So while those of you who are on Twitter, if you can feel free to tweet something that you've learned using the hashtag, something that you might want to apply when you leave here today, or a question that you're still curious about. The nice thing about hashtags is that they create a community. Somebody actually, I've been known to create hashtags in the nonprofit community, and a couple weeks ago I created one called NP-Fail, and somebody tweeted, every time Kanter creates a hashtag, an angel gets its wings. So hashtags are a great way it's a great way too if you do an events are a part of your program, to create a hashtag around the event and to use that as a way to have people continue talking about it. So, general reflections. Any closing comments? Things that you learned today? Yes.
Could you explain
what a hashtag is? That's a great question. It's the pound sign, and it's a keyword. So that's a hashtag right there. Pound pack. PACSNYC, and when somebody tweets on Twitter and uses that hashtag, people can search on that hashtag and they can see everybody using that hashtag, and it's like starting a community around that and conversation around that hashtag. For this event, the number sign. So it's kind of like opening up a party line on the phone that everybody can access, and everybody can, you can overhear other conversations that are going on, but instead of eavesdropping, you all have something in common, which is that you've attended this event. And some nonprofits actually use their hashtags to continue conversations. I was at a meeting last week at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation on advancing social media measurement, and there's a hashtag #SM_RE. And if you search that hashtag on Twitter, you'll find people who work in foundations and also nonprofits who are talking about social media measurement techniques and issues. There's another one called NP Tech, hashtag NPTECK, and that's people who are talking about nonprofits and technology. And I bet no matter what your area is or what area or issue you're working on, there is a hashtag out there of people talking about it. And there are hashtag directories, and sometimes you stumble upon them by finding the right people to follow. And you'll see the hashtags that they're using, and then you'll have a collection of hashtags that you'll be following. And it sounds really weird, but I get a lot of information by follow the hashtag. Great. Any other closing comments, reflections?
I think everything was so amazing, and I think there was a lot of talk also about the emphasis on context. But I was talking to someone else about this. There was no talk about creativity, because I think that also being creative about what you're doing and how you're going about doing it is so important, that there was really nothing there on creativity.
Yeah, creativity is such an important topic, and it's also sort of thinking outside of the box. And when you said creativity, I started to think about the last conversation that we had with Sharon, and talking about iPhone apps. And did you know that there are amazing creativity apps available on mobile phones? I have one, the Creative Whack Pack. Roger Van Ocht. I do a Creative Whack Pack card a day. It's a creative thinking card. Design for Good, Odeo, has their cards, their creativity cards. And if you just search on the apps, you'll find a number of creativity apps that are available. And I use, those are I actually have, I'm embarrassed to say, I have 25 of them on my iPhone, because I love playing with them. There's one that, writing prompts, So, and I actually use those. This might sound really weird. When I'm trying to come up with content for my blog and think of themes and ideas, I go to my creativity apps to go through a creative thinking process. Other closing comments? Reflections? On a scale, I guess everyone's waiting for the reception, right? So what I want you to do is to take I'm going to give you a whole minute, okay? There are some 3x5 cards on the table, or if you're lucky enough to have a device like this young lady, or one of these. I want you to think about something that you heard over the last couple of hours around social media, and something that you can put into practice, some small step, one idea. And I want you to write that down, think about it, and write it down on the 3x5 card. And I'm going to give you a moment of silence to do that. Great. Everybody have something? Great. That's your gift. That is your gift from this session, because I'm a big believer in, it's great to get content, but you need to make it actionable. And I think the common theme between all the topics that we discussed was that the importance of taking small, incremental steps and balancing being strategic with the spontaneity of social media. And don't let fear or the unknown or the deceptively disorganized or chaotic keep you from taking a small step in social media, because there are rewards that can come back to your organization, and even bigger rewards for your community and your network. And I just want to show people this issue of the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is focused on social media. Actually, I think I didn't mention this article, but this one is actually a must read. If you didn't have an action step, go on I don't know if it's on the web, but go order this magazine, this one. It is winter 2003. Go get a copy of it and have this be your reading. You know, there's the permanent disruption of social media. Social media has forever changed the way organizations and donors react. Really, really important article based on a study over several years. Yeah, and using networks to tackle chronic disease, and the Encore Fellowships Network. Really, really good ideas, thought-provoking, and good food for thought. Anything else to add to that? No, great. Okay, and I want to thank everybody here for coming. You were great. Thank you.